Hello world, Rega have recently brought out their new Elicit MK5 amplifier. It's a direct replacement of the amp that I've got, which is called the Elicit-R, which has been around for maybe the last 8-9 years, something like that. So they've decided to offer us a replacement. The case design is different, but it still looks pretty Rega-ish. You've still got this bright red Rega symbol on the front. The housing is, I think, quite nice. Very utilitarian, but quite nice. I'm just looking at mine. My one has got, yeah, two little blocks here, a panel along here with the controls on it. Yeah, I mean, basically, it's pretty much Rega. It's slightly different, but it's still very much within their house style, as it were. If we just have a look at these controls on the front, okay, this button here on the left looks like a power button, although it actually doesn't say power. It could actually do with having a thing that says power on it. This is something brand new for Rega in 2022, getting with the times. A headphone socket. Wow. It's the first time on a professional amp from Rega that we've actually had a headphone socket. There was a time where they didn't put headphone sockets on any of their amps, but I suppose they've now got or found themselves a cheap way that adds a headphone socket to a design without compromising any of the other electronics. I think you can pretty much bet your bottom dollar that the headphone amp inside the machine will be a separate headphone amp that doesn't interfere with the main amp circuits at all. Here's your input select button. These are the lights to show you which of your inputs you've got, and we'll talk about those inputs a bit more in a minute. All right, and here is your volume control. Now, talking of volume control, this is, I think, from a control point of view, and probably from an electronic point of view, this is the main difference between the Elicit-R, as I have the outgoing one, and the new Mark V, in that it has what they call an ALPS, ALPS, volume control. It basically means that you can operate it manually as you would a normal volume control, but also it will work via the remote, and that it will turn as you press the remote up or down. All right, it's actually quite cool and funky to look at. I had one on my Elecit-R when I had an Elecit-R many years ago. Sorry, Rega, I don't like it. My main problem with it is that if you look at where they've got this volume control set to now, i.e. 10 o'clock, as it were, imagine that the volume control itself starts with zero volume at roughly 7 o'clock on the dial. By the time you've turned that up to 10 o'clock, which is not very far, you're actually quaking in your boots. You really are. It gets really, really loud very, very quickly. That's been my experience of any kind of Alps style Rega control, Rega volume control. My Rega Luna, which I had right back in the late 90s, didn't have the remote control sort of feature of it, but again, it was just a manually operated volume control that the minute that you turned it up even past 9 o'clock on the dial was really, really very, very loud indeed, and I just found that that was just not good. I much prefer the volume control that they've got on the outgoing Elicit-R, and that I also had on my Mira 3 many years ago, which was a system of 20 lights, and each light going around the dial, imagine lights going all the way around there. Each light had within it I suppose, 4 incremental stages. So every time you increase the volume by 1, as it were, the light would just get a little bit brighter and a little bit brighter and a little bit brighter, and then you'd be on the next light up. And it actually gave you much better control over your volume control. You basically had 80 stages of volume, and it actually works very, very well indeed. And I'm sure that there is a benefit to the sound quality. It sounds much more mellow and much more detailed and relaxed and chilled than any of this style volume control that I've experienced. The downside to the Elicit-R's volume control is that it also doubles as an input control. That means that you just give the button a little press and then it turns into an input. Then when you turn the volume control, it then changes the lights here for your inputs. That can be a bit of a pain. If you use the remote, it's no issue at all. But if you're doing it manually, sometimes it doesn't actually recognize that you've actually pressed that button, and you can find yourself pressing the button and it doing nothing except changing the volume when you want to change the input, and vice versa. It can be a bit fiddly. So yeah, there's pros and cons, but overall I much prefer the 80 stage lit up volume control, because it gives you far more control over it, and you can actually be up here, or even sort of depending on the source. You know, if you've got a low volume source like a TV program, for example, you can be up here and still not feel like it's taking your ears off. Now let's have a look at these inputs in a little bit more detail. Input 1 is a moving magnet phono stage. The Elicit-R, or the Elicit as it were, has always had a moving magnet phono stage. The difference being that on the Elicit-R, at least as far as I can tell from Rega's literature, the difference is that on the Elicit-R you could actually swap that to a line socket if you wanted to. So if you had an external phono stage for a record player, such as the Aria, which I've got, then you leave that at line and plug it in to the Aria. If you've got just a record player and you haven't got a separate phono stage, provided you're using a moving magnet cartridge, then switch that to moving magnet, and then you can use input 1 for that. All right. Whereas on the Mark V, the new amp, it's basically just the moving magnet phono stage, which means that you only have 4 line inputs, which for most people covers just about everything. Obviously, with the outgoing Elicit-R, if you switch that number 1 to line and you haven't got a record player, you've got 5 separate line in sockets, and input 1 is on the R, at any rate, a better quality line input than the others. I can't remember what it is they said they've done to it, but basically they've souped it up a little bit so that it's a better sounding line input than the others. So here we've got 4 line in sockets here, and to be honest, I think 4 is more than enough. You can plug just about anything you like in there: CD players, radios. Rega used to make a radio. I think it was just called the Rega radio. It was rather good from what I've read about it. But yeah, so you could plug basically any normal traditional line source in there. But you've also got these 2 D1 and D2, which are digital sockets. So now this is something totally new for Rega. I have never seen this on one of their amps before, but they have decided to incorporate a digital to analog converter. What you do is take something like a hi-fi streamer or a laptop, computer, anything like that, and take the digital output from that and plug it into either D1 or D2, depending on whether or not you've got coaxial or an optical lead. So that is actually, could be quite useful. But the problem with Rega is that they don't always move along with the times. All right. Nowadays, we've got USB, we've got wireless, we've got Bluetooth, and neither of those three sources are accommodated. If you buy something like a modern Mac computer, such as an iMac or one of their laptops, you have not got any kind of output socket that you could use to plug into D1 or D2. Back in the day, when Apple, for example, were boasting about how many sockets that they had on their computer, they boasted that the headphone out socket doubled as an optical digital output, which could then be plugged into whichever D1 or D2 is the optical input. And that would work, and it would work very nicely with Honours Sir. However, now Apple, and by Apple I mean the rest of the computer industry will follow, they're basically sort of stripping you of your connectivity because they think that everything in the future is going to be wireless. So quite why we haven't even got a USB input here, which you could take a USB-C out from any Apple laptop, and presumably most other laptops as well. You could take a USB-C or a USB-A, if your computer's still got one, and then plug it into the USB input on the thing. So there's limited usage here of D1 and D2. Back in the day, it would have been very useful. You could have even taken a very cheap CD player and just taken its digital output and plugged it into D1 or D2, and you've therefore instantly upgraded your CD player to what I would imagine, because I've got the old Elicit-R, I would imagine is actually a much improved sound over a cheap CD player. That's all technology that is stuck in the 2000s, maybe sort of going up to the late 2010s, but it's not what people are using now. I'm not saying Rega don't give us D1 and D2, but give us USB and some wireless functionality too. I can see why you haven't. It's basically a cut back version of the Rega DAC. The Rega DAC has been in, in whatever guise it has been in Rega's range for ages. I used to have one, and very nice it is too. But it had inputs and bells and whistles on it galore. The Saturn-R also has a separate DAC in it, and that has the USB. None of the Rega products have got any kind of wireless facility at all, but a USB facility is on the Saturn-R, and I suppose they're trying to say, right, well, we don't want to invalidate either the Saturn-R or the Rega DAC, because even the new Saturn still has a USB digital input as well. It's just a shame, really. This is doubling up on what Rega do already. Now they've put it into an amp, depending on, obviously you and your circumstances, but it's actually quite limited, really. And it's disappointing that they have not got USB or any kind of wireless functionality there at all. So let's have a look at these technical specifications. I don't understand many technical specifications, but we'll have a look anyway. Okay, so it's 105 watts per channel into 8 ohms, which is pretty much what the outgoing one is. There's no upgrade there whatsoever. Looks pretty much the same size as mine and probably weighs as much. 12.5 kilos is heavy. Any amp worth its salt is heavy. Supported sampling rates. Okay, that's all to do with the DAC and I shouldn't really worry too much about that. Whatever you plug into it will work. And supported bit depths, 16 to 24 bit. Again, whatever you plug into there will work. On the back here, speaker outputs, power, input 1 being your phono stage. Those are your line inputs there. Right, we have a record input and record output. You've also got a record output link, a direct input and a preamp output, which I've never used, but which means that you can use this as part of a surround system with other amplifiers and use a separate preamp. Lots of different sort of configurations that you can use it in, and these three, record output link, direct input and preamp output, control all of that. There's your optical input, and here is your coax input there. So apart from the 2 digital inputs, it's pretty much the same as the outgoing Elicit-R, which means that for me, I don't necessarily think that it's a worthwhile upgrade if you've got an Elicit-R. If you've got a Brio and you really want to upgrade your sound, then yes, go for or consider going for an Elicit Mark 5. Or if you're not fussed about the digital inputs, find a second-hand Elicit-R. Enjoy the huge upgrade in sound. All right, the Elicit-R and the Elicit Mark 5, I don't even need to hear it. I know they'll be brilliant. They'll be absolutely brilliant. However, there are alternatives. I had a little sort of text message exchange with Ashley, and he thought that the Yamaha AS501 was a pretty good amplifier that offered most things that the Elicit Mark 5 offers at a third of the price. So let's have a little look at that. All of this stuff here, purity, audio reproduction, yarby-darby-dar, doesn't really mean anything, to be honest. Custom made power transformer, yardy-dardy-dar. Blinding you with science, these first 4 bullet points are. Basically, it's 85 watts into 8 ohms. Basically, this max power amp thing here is just basically if you're measuring peaks rather than measuring RMS, which is what most hi-fi amps will be quoted in. RMS, it's a lower figure, all right? So this is not quite as powerful as the Elicits. However, that doesn't necessarily matter. Obviously, there are sort of within reasons, but 85 watts per channel is pretty hefty. It's more powerful than the Alexa, for example, which I think is 78 or something like that. Pure direct mode for greater sound purity in capitals. Whatever that means, continuous variable loudness control. Yamaha. Back in the day when we had boom boxes that played tapes and radio and stuff, and we carried them around with us and took them to the park and to the beach, that sort of thing, they had a little control on there called loudness, because the idea of having a button to add to the technical thingy of these things, they were covered in labels and dials and buttons and things like that, and the extra button called loudness, wow, it must be amazing. No, it's not amazing, really. What a loudness control circuit does is compensate for the fact that at low levels that will not disturb other people in the house or the neighbours or whatever, our ears are less sensitive to treble and bass, and therefore a loudness circuit basically at low volumes boosts treble and bass just a bit, so that it's trying to sort of compensate from what your ear is missing by not being able to hear it, as it were, because your ears are very insensitive to deep bass and high treble at low volumes. Otherwise, we'd be deafened by thunderstorms and changes in the weather. So don't read too much into that. The fact that it's continuous variable just means that as you turn the volume up, the amount that is being boosted is getting less. And it's been in amplifier circuits since there were amplifier circuits, basically. So I wouldn't worry about that. Gold-plated speaker terminals and RCA, CD, phono and coaxial terminals, digital audio inputs for TV or Blu-ray player, or for the output of a CD player if you want to upgrade that, or put in a laptop, whatever. Just basically D1 and D2 essentially here. Bluetooth wireless adapter, so it's presumably an optional extra. Simple yet sophisticated design. An auto power standby. Yeah, great. So basically, Yamaha haven't really made a great deal of blowing the trumpet of their amplifier there, but it's basically offering everything there that the Elicit MK5 is offering at a much lower price, and therefore it's probably worth just having a little look at, right? Find it, go and hear it. The same with, any hi-fi that you buy, really, especially now that people have not got enough money to pay for their lecky bills and whatever. Life is getting hard for people, and I suppose this is for many people it's an if only we could dream kind of thing. If you really are in the market for an amplifier and you're spending money, go and listen to whatever it is that you're going to buy. I no doubt that this Yamaha amp is lovely. I know the Elicit from my experience of obviously having listened to my one and listened to the Rega products and owned many Rega products for the last 30 odd years. Then I know what they're like, and I know what they sound like. But just because a product is a third cheaper doesn't mean that it's worth dismissing. All right, so I will leave you there. Okay, just something interesting that's come out from Rega, and I wish them luck with it. See you later. Bye bye.